Okay. So first of all, very few words of warning, let's say. I am going to talk about a more general topic and not in an academic way. So I'm not going to go into the details of the papers that I am going to cite throughout the presentation. This is going to be a more generic way to talking about human parity. And just a side note, most of the images that you are going to see in the presentation have been done using stable diffusion. So if they look strange, it's not my fault, it's AI doing everything. So what is human parity? Again, I'm not going to talk about human parity in a very academic way. So my first quote will be from Jurassic Park, saying that the scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could do something that they didn't stop to think if they should. This is obviously not the case for machine translation in general, but for human parity, there are certain parts of the human parity that may require further talk and further thought. What is human parity? For those of you who have never heard about it, human parity is basically defined the moment when a computer will translate with the same quality as a human translator. Sorry. So the output of the human translation and the machine translation will be more or less of the same quality. It's a catchy name, basically, for the goal of the research in this moment. It's not the only part of the science where a catchy name has been given to the final goal of the research. One other example might be quantum research, where we have quantum supremacy, for instance. Quantum supremacy is the moment in which a quantum computer will be able to solve a problem that a classical computer, so the ones that we have today with the CPUs and GPUs and whatever else, can't solve unless it is occupied for an unbelievable amount of time, like 200 or 300 years. Why am I talking about quantum supremacy in the localization world? Because the two concepts, the human parity and quantum supremacy, do have some parts of them that actually are quite similar. For instance, they are a comparison between two things, one existing and one that should be achieved at a certain point in time. They are kind of hyped. So we all know that machine translation has had various moments of hyping, and human parity as well. It's presented as the final goal of the research in machine translation. So the final goal would be to have a machine translation that can translate any language to any language with the same quality as a human. In quantum supremacy as well, we have a hyping pikes where companies have presented quantum supremacy as almost reached. They both have catchy names. So human parity sounds well as quantum supremacy. There's a nice ring to it. And again, they have both been announced at a certain point in time, and they have both been refuted. So at certain moments, companies, which we'll see later, have said that they had reached either human parity or quantum supremacy. And then somebody came out and say, that's not really true if you really look at the things. For instance, in quantum supremacy in 2019, Google has announced on Nature that quantum supremacy had been reached in a certain task. And I'm not going to go too much into details about quantum supremacy, but basically, after this particular article, other researchers have come out with different papers saying that actually there were some parts of the article that were not correct, or if they were correct, they were too limited to be presented as quantum supremacy. And the same things happened with the human parity. In particular, in 2016 and 2018, first Google and then Microsoft came out with these papers, so achieving human parity in automatic Chinese to English translations, and neural machine translation, bridging the gap between human and machine translation. The articles came out, they were read, they were commented on, and in the research community, a few other papers came out these are just two examples of them, saying that basically the way that quality is perceived or is presented in the two Microsoft and Google papers is not correct, or is not, again, is too limited to be considered as human parity. The problem here is that human parity, or these two papers, kind of reached the papers, the press, and it's catchy. Again, the name human parity and the concept of human parity is quite sketchy. So if it is presented to the wider public, it catches on. There is, however, between the two concepts, a few differences. The main one being the comparison to peers, which is true for quantum supremacy, and it's not true for human parity. In quantum supremacy, there's a computer being compared to a computer, an older computer to a new computer. So two different kinds of machines being compared. While in human parity, the two things that should come to the same level is machines and humans. So the results of the action of a human is compared to the results of the action of a machine, which is not completely fair in a sense. And to assess, let's say, the thoughts on human parity by a wider community, we launched a very small empty questionnaire, or a questionnaire on machine translation quality, which we launched in SurveyMonkey. There were either 6 or 8 questions, depending on whether the respondent would come from the localization industry or any other kind of industries. We had 84 respondents, 16 of which were incomplete answers, so we just left them out, and we consider 68 replies in the results that I'm going to show you. So we have the participant, as you see, they were linguists, language technology specialists, a localization project manager, or other jobs in the language industry. But we also wanted to reach people that were not coming from the industry, to see how they perceive the machine translation and machine translation quality. Between these 9% of other people, there were 3 translators, which I have no idea why they kind of did not consider themselves linguists. 1 translation project manager, which again, I don't know why it did not answer localization project manager, which is more or less what I wanted to say. 1 doctor and 1 editor. We had at least 1 person which is completely outside the localization industry, the doctor. The first question was, do you think that today the automatic translation, so machine translation, can be used without human intervention? And fortunately, most of them said no. Only 4% said that it can. And a good percentage, 37%, would say that it depends on the context. What they mean is, well, the content types. So whether it is short-lived, user-generated, or literary translation, and so on. Obviously, the language combinations. So there are some language combinations that are better than others. For gisting, it's okay. Otherwise, not doable. The final use, again, or the deadline, the publishing, whether it should be published or not, and the training of the MT. So some of them did answer that if the MT is trained, then it's usable without human intervention. Otherwise, it should be revised. Second question would be, do you think that today's automatic translation is good enough to be used as a starting point for a human intervention? Now you see here this kind of symbol over there, that's still Stable Diffusion, and it's a symbol for a translators, because this question was only aimed at people coming from the localization industry. As I said, there were either 6 or 8 questions, and this was one of the questions only for the localization industry people. Most of them said that yes, machine translation is good enough to be used for post-editing. Only 2% said no, and 60% said depends on context. In this case, the context is a wider type. Well, of course, again, content creation, content type. So creative, legal text, or very technical text. The language combinations, again, obviously. DMT output quality, which is more or less a generic term for both of them. So if it's good enough, it's good enough. Otherwise, it should be done from scratch. Again, DMT training and the payment. Here, somebody did say that it depends whether you get paid enough or not. The second question that I only aimed at people from the localization industry is if they want the machine translation, or how would they want the machine translation to be for it to be okay as a starting point for post-editing. They could choose between a perfect automatic translation, so perfect machine translation, human parity, and only 10% did answer that perfect automatic translation would be desirable. Almost perfect with sporadic mistakes of any kind, 39%, a high percentage, which is slightly different from medium quality automatic translation with more frequent mistake, but easy to spot. And here lays the difference more or less between neural machine translation that has a lot less mistakes, but of very different kinds, very well hidden in a good fluency, and statistical machine translation where you have more mistakes, but easily spotted and more consistent with one another. Obviously, almost nobody said low quality machine translation. A few of them still don't want to use machine translation, obviously, so no automatic translation ever. And there was somebody who kind of caught my intention in this particular context. So this was a trick question in a sense, and somebody did say, I don't really understand the replies because it should be as good as possible. But if it was perfect, so if we did reach human parity, you wouldn't need humans anymore, which is kind of interesting. Also, there were some kind of very good suggestions, like you could have a machine translation that kind of give you, if it's not sure that that is the correct translation, then it would just give you some ideas and then you choose which one you like the most. Then the next question would be, do you think that human translator maintain the same quality throughout all languages and all domains? Again, a trick question for anybody working in the localization industry. So luckily, most of the respondents would say, no, we don't. Unfortunately, there was a 9% of people that said yes. So humans would get the same quality throughout all languages and all domains. And again, there was somebody who kind of caught my trick and said, I do not understand the question. Individual human translators do not translate all languages and all domains. So again, human parity compared to what? Do we get the human parity for language by language, domain by domain, or do we want human parity in general? Unfortunately, again, there was this 9% that said yes. And among these 9%, there was a doctor. So outside, the one and only person that actually came from outside the localization industry think that a human, when you speak to a human, it keeps the whole, every time that a human translator translates, it keeps the same quality all days throughout the whole year, 24/7 for all language and all domains, which it's kind of not probable, let's say. And finally, the two last questions would be, do you think automatic translation quality will ever be as high as human translation quality? And do you think that automatic translation with the same quality of human translation would be desirable? Which, in short, would be, will human parity ever be reached? And is human parity desirable? And here I divided the respondents into 4 main groups, which is this. So 29% I called the chill, which is basically human parity is not desirable, but it's never going to happen. So no problem. 28% would be the hopeful. Human parity, is desirable, and it's happening. So let's just wait a while and hope for the best. The downcast, human parity is not desirable, but it is going to happen. So at some point it's going to come and I have no way to stop it. And then there's just the 5% very narrow 5%, the disenchanted, saying human parity is desirable, but it's not going to happen. So I wish it could, but it's not going to happen. So why worry? Again, there are some interesting comments like this one, which is that human parity, it is desirable for anyone but those working in the language industry. So for everybody, but not for translators and not for LSPs and so on. There were, of course, other very interesting comments throughout the all answers. Somebody called me out saying that the questionnaire is biased in its assumption that human translation per se would be better than machine translation when there's a huge spread in human translation quality, which is what we were saying before, and is the main argument for the papers against the Microsoft and Google papers and all the other human parity papers. People, the downcast, as we said, saying that I'm not feeling as a translator anymore. So machine translation is getting better, but I'm not particularly happy about it. And obviously, again, income, rates, and payment. So the survey ignores the massive question of the income of translators as a result, of the development of machine translation. Do dentists who use advanced tech have to reduce their fees because of tech? Do surgeons who use advanced tech have to reduce their fees because of the tech? I think not, which is also true. And the questionnaire did ignore this. It was not meant to speak about the rates, but that is a huge problem. So what is the outcome of presenting human parity in this sense as the ultimate goal of the research on machine translation? Basically, the main problem is that you have machine translation on one side and human translation on the other side. And these are the two poles, and there's nothing in between. You either had a very good machine translation or a very good human translation. While we all know that in the localization industry, mostly we have to do with post-editing. So a human in between. Machine translation, yes, but through a human. Why is this a problem? For translators, it is a problem because rates are starting to decrease, are going to decrease. There's a dehumanization because their job is now perceived as something that even a machine can do. There's a general misinformation again because they think, okay, machine translation is good enough, or it's completely not good enough, and they don't really know the tech per se. They just get the final output, and they are told post-edit without much further information. On the other hand, they have hyped expectations, so they think that the machine is going to be almost perfect. So the rates that are decreasing are connected to an almost perfect output that they are going to have to correct. There's a problem for the LSPs because clients mistrust machine translation. If you get presented with either machine translation on one side and human translation on the other side, the clients who know mostly nothing about localization, they won't think that you can use machine translation and then have a human that actually has the last word. So they are going to say, don't use machine translation at all. I want human translation. Rate decrease again, because yes, you don't use machine translation, but come on, machine translation can do this at this very low rate, so why can't you? There's a shorter turnaround times because they are getting used to machine translated text that gets delivered a lot faster. And there's, again, hyped expectation, as in, if you can't do this at this particular rate, then I'm going to just machine translate it because it's the same. It says that it's good now. And of course, there's a huge problem for end users because they misplace trust. Sorry, it's yellow. I don't know if you can actually see that, but misplaced trust because, again, they are told that the machine translation are getting better and better and better. And they are not being told that most of the published stuff that gets done with machine translation or with AI in general, since we were speaking about ChatGPT before, it has been checked by a human. So they are basically going to go and, I don't know, Google Translate a request like, can you tell me where the station is, and then find themselves, I don't know, in a cafe, because Google kind of mistranslated what they wanted to do. And again, hype the expectation, because they expect that any language job is now a machine job. So rates are lower, but quality is still the same. So just to keep on with not very academic quotations, this one is for Čapek, Rossum's Universal Robots, which is by the way, the play where the word robot was first used, and in not very happy ending. If anybody has not read it, it's not a very happy ending, but it's an interesting read. And at a certain point, one of the characters would say, "My dear Miss Glory, the robots are not people. Mechanically, they are more perfect than we are, have an enormously developed intelligence, but they have no soul." So the idea here is that robots are better than us in some things, like speed, for instance, like translating into Japanese. They are better than me at translating into Japanese, because I have no idea how to translate in Japanese. But they have no soul, so they are still not human, and therefore they should not be compared to human. Therefore, what I would not suggest but hope for is a new name for human parity, or a new goal for the research. And I would like to end my presentation with this last quote from The Imitation Game movie from 2014, where Alan Turing, where I honestly, I don't think he ever said this, but in the movie he does. He says, "Of course, machine can think as people do. A machine is different from a person, hence they think differently. And the interesting question is, just because something thinks differently from you, does that mean it's not thinking? And if we can say that about one another, then why can't we say the same thing for brains built of copper and wire steel?" And indeed, if you kind of see how a machine looks at a sentence to translate it, it kind of, it creates vectors. So it creates numbers so they can read the words, but the vectors are not like word for word. For instance, it can split words into seemingly unrelated kind of chunks of letters, but then again, it works. It gives you a good enough translation, let's say. So why do we expect it to be on the same level as human? And why do we expect humans to be on the same level as machines? And with this, I will leave you.